Duke fans, hello, and welcome to episode 241 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. We hope you all had a great weekend and a wonderful start to this week. On this episode, we have another interview we're going to recap. We will also look back on Duke football's defeat to NC State over the weekend, and we end with a wonderful review that includes a question that will probably have us debate quite a bit. But before we dissect all that, I'm Donald Wine, the host for this week. I had a lovely week in Buffalo, relaxing with some friends, but now I'm back in Washington, D.C. I have my two co-hosts with me. First, Sam in Boston. Hello to you.
Hello. I would like to say happy birthday to my father, who turned 66 today. Very excited to celebrate his birthday. I got to see him over the weekend, and that is my personal life update for the day.
Awesome. Happy birthday, Mr. Klein. That's awesome. And in Atlanta, we have Jason Evans. Hello, Jason.
Hey, I have no birthdays in my family for any weeks coming up. There's nothing happening. It is boring. The weather's getting colder. It's harder to go out and bike ride every day because it's getting colder. I hate coronavirus.
Yeah, well, you know what? Because it's funny you mentioned going out and biking. I cannot do that either because I don't have a bike and it's hard to do that in the city. So I got one of those bikes that you put under your desk, except for me, I don't have a desk. So I just get to sit this in front of my couch and I can watch soccer and do a little biking while I watch soccer. So, or basketball or any other sport, which is pretty cool.
So I have a stationary bike and I sometimes watch sports to it, especially Duke sports. And I find I can bang out an hour plus on the exercise cycle while watching a Duke game and not even realize that sweat is pouring off of me. It's a great way to exercise.
Like literally just before we started recording, while I was waiting for us to kind of get our schedules together, I was just biking. So if you guys can't see me out there, but Jason can see that I have a little glisten on my face because I just got a nice little 15-minute thing in just before we did this. So we're ready to go. And we will start with another interview that we have. In this week's media availability by Duke Basketball, Matthew Hurt was on the mic. Jason was there to represent us as reporters asked Hurt about his transformation as a basketball player and his thoughts on the current preseason so far. So here are some of the major nuggets from that interview with Matthew Hurt.
Word on the street is you put on a lot of weight since the end of last season, presumably good weight. Can you tell us how that happened during a pandemic and how you see that benefiting your game?
Yeah, for sure. I got home around mid-March last year, took like a week or two off since the season ended, and just try to focus on just eating right, eating a lot, and just stay working out and lifting. I got with our strength coach, Coach Will, 3-4 times a week we lifted. So just doing that every day during quarantine. I was lucky enough to find a gym in a weight room. So I was blessed with that. So I think just doing that day by day until I came back to Duke on August 2nd was really a benefit for me.
So how do you see that impacting your game?
I feel like it's going to impact a big part of my game because, a knock on me was, I was a little lighter guarding the four. People would try to take advantage of me down low. But I feel like this year, especially on defense and also on offense, just like attacking it, be stronger with the ball, and just taking contact and finishing over taller defenders.
You see yourself playing more on the blocks?
Yeah, I think Coach has been using me a lot of different ways on the perimeter and the blocks. If there's a mismatch, just trying to be an attacker all game.
All right, we'll go to Jason Evans next. Jason, go ahead.
Hey, Matt. Jason Evans, Duke Basketball Report podcast. By the way, Jim Sumner just stole my first three questions. So rather than your own individual development, I wanted to talk about the team for a moment. DJ Stewart told us just last week that when I asked him who'd been the most impressive player in practices, he said it was you. So let me ask you the same question. Who do you think has been the most impressive player? Who's the guy who's kind of surprising you a little bit when you guys get together and play?
For me, I think it's Mark Williams. I think just seeing him as one like a really good shot blocker. I didn't see much of him in high school, but seeing him live and playing against him, shot blocker. He tries to block everything. Sometimes he goaltends, but most of the time he blocks it. So I think just having that rim present really helps. And then he's more skilled than people think. Like he can we can give him the ball and he can score a basket for us. So I think Mark Williams really stood out for me in the first couple of weeks of practice.
Have there been specific combos of players that you've mostly been working with? There's lots of talk and speculation. People are wondering, is this going to be a year that Duke plays 10, 11 guys?
Yeah, for sure. We have 11 guys that can play, significant minutes. It's not going to be just a starting five. It's not going to be, a couple guys, one or two guys off the bench. It's going to be a whole team collective effort for us to win games this year.
And that kind of leads me to my last question, and then I'll be done. Talk to me about how the team do you think is going to play this year? We've heard a lot of guys talk about playing a little bit faster pace than in the past. Is that what you see Duke doing?
Yeah, we have, especially the freshman class, we can get out in transition. They're all athletic, playing a little faster, getting out in transition is really going to benefit us because, we have so many players that can play very well and a lot of minutes. So I think just using our players that can play and using that to our advantage.
Hey, Matt, Josh Graham, Sports Hub Triad in Greensboro. Before I get to my question, I just want a clarification on the picking up of weight. It was reported that you picked up 15 pounds. Is that accurate? And was there a coach that challenged you to do so?
Right now, playing weight, I'm about 240. So playing weight last year was around 220. So it's about 220 or about 20 pounds of muscle. And then I think it was more like just like being motivated to like get better and to see like the feedback from my coaches, just try to get better during quarantine.
And the question I had, last week, Coach said on Reddick's podcast that the day of the national championship game, at around the time the game would have been tipping off in Atlanta, you guys all got together on a Zoom call, and he was wearing a suit and gave you guys a pregame speech. I see you smiling. What do you remember about that speech?
Yeah, so that conversation did happen. He was wearing a suit, and he was just saying how we could have been there playing for the national championship, and just saying us how proud we were, or how proud of how he was on us. I think so. Just hearing that, and just seeing like constant FaceTime calls and phone calls throughout the quarantine really helped. Us as a team as confident. I think Coach Shire and Coach K have really preached getting my shot off a lot quicker. Last year, my shot wasn't as quick as it should be, but I feel like just getting my shot preparation is a lot different than it was last year. But yeah, just working on counters, going right, going left, having different moves in the post. So just trying to have a lot of counters because the defense is gonna scout me and scout the team. So I think just having different counters is gonna help me.
Thank you. Hi, Matt. Thanks for your time. From the 5-on-5s or scrimmages, inter-squad scrimmages, what is the strength? What will be the strength of this team? And can you talk a little bit about the freshman class and what you've seen from them so far?
Our strength, I think just, getting stops and getting out in transition. We have a lot of athletic guys on our team, and just showing what they're capable in transitions is very special. And then for the freshman class, each one of them brings a unique skill set. I'll start off with Henry. His energy, rebounding, does a great job with it. Brings it every day. That's what he brings. Mark, shot blocker, can finish. Really good lob threat. As you know, Jalen, out in transition, very special, very special. Jamin really can shoot it. Can defend, can drive. He surprised me a lot too. And then, of course, DJ can really shoot, can really handle, can really get to the rim. And then Jeremy, just really good point guard, really calm point guard. So I think our freshman class is really good, and I think they don't get as much attention as they should. So I think they're just all really good.
All right, Brian Horace, go ahead.
Hey, Matthew, there was a question about leadership earlier. Has the staff talked to you about what it means to be a leader at Duke?
Just try to lead by example and also lead by talk, especially on the court. Because last year, I was pretty quiet, especially on defense. But so this year, I'm just trying to take that next step and just be more comfortable around them. But also just leading by example off the court, whether it's classes, whether it's not missing any meetings, just trying to let the guys know that everything and everything here is important.
And again, thanks to Mike DeGeorge and Duke Basketball for inviting us once again to these media sessions. We really appreciate it, and I know we appreciate Matthew Hurt taking the time to answer some questions. We'll get Jason's take on what he heard during the interview in a few, but I wanted to bring in Sam first. Sam, what part stood out to you about what Matthew Hurt said?
Well, I liked the way that Jason Evans prompted him with, Matthew, we heard from other players that you are the most improved player on the team. Who is impressing you the most? So, Jason, I liked the setup on that. But then his answer was also very intriguing when he started talking about Mark Williams. Because when we were coming into the offseason, I think we all really wanted to highlight Jalen Johnson and to a lesser extent Jeremy Roach as kind of the standout guys in this class. But it feels like over the summer, watching little video clips, getting that stuff from Duke men's basketball, and then also hearing from some of the players, it seems that Mark Williams has been very impressive to this point, and I cannot wait now to see him in a Duke uniform. You know, hopefully he can take 15 minutes a game or so at center and be really effective blocking shots and changing up the game. Duke doesn't have another player, I think, who has his versatility. I think we're all excited to see what Patrick Tapé can do, but hopefully we have realistic expectations for him. He's a transfer from the Ivy League, so if he was going to be a star, I think we would have known it by now in his college career. Mark Williams is fresh and new, and I think could be a huge contributor for Duke this year, especially after hearing guys like Matthew Hurt talk so highly of how he's performed thus far.
Yeah, well, and to me, it's also impressive that he mentioned Jamin Brakefield as someone who, you know, is surprising with his shooting touch and his athleticism. For Matthew Hurt to single out those two guys, you know, it just surprised me. It's weird because the recruiting rankings, I mean, Sam, you brought it up. We really thought that Jalen Johnson was going to be the stud from this freshman class, and not saying he won't be, but it's kind of weird. We just keep on hearing about some of these other guys, and it really speaks to something else that Matthew talked about, which was the depth. This is going to be an incredibly deep team, no question about that.
If any of Williams, Jamin Brakefield, Patrick Tapé, or Henry Coleman are providing Duke 15 minutes a game, that really helps Jalen Johnson and Matthew Hurt in terms of the workload that's expected from them. I think Duke fans can look ahead to this season and say, all right, Matthew Hurt has some experience at the college level. Jalen Johnson doesn't. I don't think either of them can project to play much more than 30 minutes a game. So that's still another 20 minutes that you need out of big bodies to round out the team. If Mark Williams is taking a big chunk of that, I think that gives us a lot of peace of mind about where this team is going.
And toward that end, there were so many questions and so much talk on that phone call with reporters about the weight that Matthew Hurt has gained. And I loved hearing him talk about how it allows him to play differently in the post, that he's worked on his ability to move and, be better positioned on the floor. He talked about his base. That's such an important thing for a big man playing in the post. Look, we know Matthew Hurt is going to be a dynamite lights out shooter. And by the way, I didn't include it, in the sound that we just played for all of you. But at one point he did address the question of who's the better shooter, him, Joey Baker, or DJ Stewart. And like Joey and DJ, he refused to weigh in. It's like none of these guys want to admit which one of them is the best. I think none of them know which one's the best shooter, but boy, what a great situation to be in. But I just loved that Matt talked a lot. Matthew talked a lot about his ability to handle this extra 20 pounds, how it's changing his game a little bit. And I want to point out something real important that he mentioned. Again, I don't think I included it in the sound, but he talked about Duke wanting to switch 1 through 4 or 1 through 5. 1 through 5, he said. I think that's a recognition on the part of Matthew Hurt. He's going to play some 5 for this team. He's going to be the biggest player on the floor at times for Duke. He is prepared to guard ACC big men, and Duke is prepared to switch every single guy. It's something that's not easy to do. You cannot do that when you have Mark Williams on the floor, but it's perhaps possible that you can do it when you have Matthew Hurt as your big man. It'll be a really interesting thing to see on defense and the speed at which Duke can play. If you have guys who can switch like that, it allows you to play offensively and defensively much faster.
I remember, we had talked about his versatility when the news first came out that he had done the Juicy Lucy diet and gained the 20 pounds. He put it at around 20 pounds. I think his dad said 26 or whatever, but one or two Juicy Lucy off margin of error here. But the versatility of him being able to guard multiple guys is going to be what helps this team, because we were looking for that last year at times. And because he couldn't really defend the 5 very well, the versatility wasn't as prevalent. So now that you have that option to put him on any guy on the court, that really, we can play a big lineup, we can play a small lineup, and he can be out there. I do want to touch on one thing that I thought was interesting. He talked about how the coaching staff wanted him to get his shot off quicker and wanted him to work on that in the offseason. Now, if you go back to before he came to Duke, when he was recruited, he mentioned that he had a quick trigger. We mentioned that too, that he could set his feet, get his shot off very fast. We also mentioned last year that he wasn't doing that his release was more methodical, but it was slower. So it's interesting that they focused on him getting his shot off faster. That will be important if we're going to be, as all these guys have mentioned in these interviews we've seen, a fast team in transition, moving the ball around. That's going to require guys to get their shot off quickly. If he can speed up his release and make that with pretty good consistency, it makes him that much more of a scoring threat every night. And when it comes to all these guys, if you see him running down the flank or running down the middle, you're not going to know where the ball is going to. And I think that's going to play in the Duke's hands very well.
Yeah, and one of the things he said, Donald, that somewhat relates to that, and again, I apologize to folks. I have all these things that he said that I couldn't include in the bits of sound that we excerpted for all of you to listen to. But one of the things he mentioned was, you talk about getting down the floor. He talked about putting his head down and getting to his spot on the wing on fast breaks to put up threes. He specifically talked about Duke shooting threes in transition, and that's something they've been working on in practice. I think you're going to see a lot of that from this team. 3 points, better than 2 points. And in transition, you're probably going to be more open than in a regular half-court offense. And it sounds like this Duke team is really focused on getting these great shooters that we have, more shooters than we've had in recent years, getting them to the spots where they can get open threes and bury other teams.
And if you want to learn more about some of the other quotes that we weren't able to pull from this interview, I know Duke Basketball releases the quotes from selected quotes from this interview. You'll see a lot that we have played, but you'll see others that didn't make this episode on GoDuke.com on the basketball webpage. They like to release those after they release these interviews. So again, thank you to Duke Basketball and to Matthew Hurt for taking the time to speak with reporters and with us about this upcoming season. Okay, guys, we will talk more about basketball in a little bit, but I want to shift gears to Duke football. They went over to Carter Finley Stadium last weekend to play the NC State Wolfpack, and it was a game that saw Duke play pretty well to start the game. We had a halftime lead, and then we were shut out in the second half by the Wolfpack. The final score, NC State 31, Duke 20. Duke drops to 1-5 on the season. They have a bye this weekend before they host Charlotte on Halloween in their only non-conference matchup of the season. Jason, I will go to you first. What did you see that went wrong for the Blue Devils, particularly in the second half?
We can't run the ball and we turn the ball over. How about that? Does that work for you?
Yeah, that works for me. Cool. Done. Thanks.
Look, so first of all, I just want to say Duke and NC State clearly only play football once every 7 years because these games break football. They break our perception of what a game is supposed to be. Last time we played them, there were 2 kick returns for touchdowns, 2 interceptions for touchdowns. This time, there are 2 blocked punts for touchdowns, and we had a ball that magically teleported through the hands of a Duke cornerback, somehow didn't hit his hands, and magically appeared on the helmet of an NC State wide receiver for the game-breaking touchdown. That play that looked like it absolutely should have been an interception, but instead turned into a touchdown. That's the difference in the game. That's the thing that shot Duke in the foot. But the real difference in the game is, once again, Duke had too many we had 3 turnovers. Duke now has on the season 8 fumbles and 12 interceptions. 14 of those 20 turnovers come by Chase Bryce. The 14 turnovers by Chase Bryce are more than all but 2 teams in the country. I want to repeat that. I want folks to understand that. Our quarterback has committed to more turnovers than all but 2 entire teams in the country. Those teams, by the way, Georgia Tech and Mississippi State. He has the most interceptions of any quarterback in all of college football. There's just no way. I mean, you mentioned, Donald, we got a week off and then a game against Charlotte, a Conference USA team. We should beat up on a team like that. Not that Charlotte's awful, not by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not even sure Duke's going to be favored in that game, but they are not the caliber opponent that Duke should have trouble with. But we must spend this time off, this week off, to get healthier, get rested, and get better at execution and stop these turnovers. And the running game, I just want to mention it really quick. We rushed for more than 350 yards against Syracuse. We had 2 running backs who each ran for 150 plus yards. Those 2 running backs combined for 43 yards on 27 carries against NC State. I know that we got some yards on the ground from Chase Bryce scrambling around and fooling the defense, and Bryce becoming more of a runner than we've seen in recent games. And Chase Bryce got 86 yards on the ground, and that's great, but that's not sustainable unless your regular running backs are able to actually get more than 2 yards per carry. Neither of our running backs average more than 2 yards per carry. This NC State team's a pretty good team, and the schedule the rest of the way is reasonably favorable for Duke. But my goodness, we can't have our running backs rush for less than 2 yards a carry. We can't turn the ball over 3 times. We can't have a quarterback who frankly barely completes 50% of his passes and expect to win football games. Period. End of story. That's all I got.
Jason, you talked about the would-be interception that turned touchdown for NC State being the turning point. I want to point right to the beginning of the second half where Duke recovers a fumble in NC State territory, has the ball beginning the drive at the 25-yard line, eventually ends up getting a first and goal from the 4 and can't convert that into any points. Now, I know that it makes sense to, if you're 4th and 1 from the 1 yard line, if you're 4th and goal, you want to punch it in, and damn if you leave your opponent stranded at the 1 there. But man, that's a rough way to start the second half for Duke, and then it was all downhill from there. Bryce's 2 picks occur in the second half there, and Duke really couldn't generate any offense. Jason, you mentioned that looking ahead at the bye, one of the things that Duke needs is rest. And if you look at that second half, the way that Duke collapsed and let NC State completely take over the game, I think rest is going to be the most important thing for the Blue Devils this week, is just recover from this tough string of games that they've had, and hopefully, catch Charlotte after the bye and maybe steal a win there. And then, hey, UNC was looking good for a while and now has gotten offed by Florida State. Maybe UNC's fortunes are turning for the worse here, and perhaps Duke gets a good shot at them in a few weeks. But yeah, this was a rough one, especially in the second half.
You can't turn the ball over. We talked about that. We've talked about that all season. Our running game was inconsistent. We've talked about that all year. It really has been an Achilles heel some weeks, and it was no exception on Saturday. And you got to score in the second half. Pitching a goose egg in the second half does not help, even if you have the halftime lead, unless you also defensively pitch a shutout, which we didn't do. But I do say this: you mentioned, Sam, the upcoming games. We have the bye. We now have Charlotte at home, UNC at home, Wake at home, at Georgia Tech Thanksgiving weekend, and then close out at home against Florida State. 4 games at home, 4 games that are winnable. I mean, even with as badly as we've played in some of these games so far, those games are very winnable, along with our rivals who, in my opinion, just not have been as good as their ranking is. And I think they came back down to earth in the last couple of weeks. So we have to do some soul searching while we rest this week. Try to find those things that we do well, make sure we get ready for them. Figure out how to take care of the football. I don't know if we need stickum. I don't know if we need duct tape. I don't know what we need to keep the football in our hands, but it clearly is a backbreaker if you cannot score because you do not have the football because you gave it to the other team. So we have to limit those turnovers moving forward. There's still a chance to salvage the season. We have the bye week to rest up. Let's see if the guys will respond on Halloween at Charlotte. We'll talk more about that next week. Next up, we do want to finish by reading one of our wonderful reviews that we received, but this one comes with a question that will be sure to be a point of debate among us. Stick around through this commercial break to find out what that question is. All right, guys, we are back, and like we said we would do, we have a nice review to read. And out there, for those of you out there, we highly encourage 5-star reviews. And if you leave a nice note, we will read it on the podcast. So make sure you do that if you haven't already. Above all, we greatly appreciate it. It helps us with our searches and all these other back-end things. We really appreciate it above all. This week, we have a review that comes from Stormrunner 107. And Stormrunner leaves us with an interesting question at the end. So here's his review. His review goes, amazing. If you're a Duke fan, this is the best podcast to watch. They have kept me entertained during the COVID era, and they have been doing a great job. I have a question, though. Who do you think is the best Duke player of all time? Firstly, thank you, Stormrunner 107, once again for the review. We greatly appreciate it. And we all saw that question, and we thought, yep, let's answer that on the show. So, Sam, Jason, the question, who do you think is the best player of all time? Remember, you can only pick one person, and you got to rock with them forever. Sam, you get to go first.
I think there are a few guys that made an impact. So they had to have made an impact nationally in college basketball, right? That, you know, the types of guys that are eligible for jersey retirement or would have been eligible for jersey retirement had they stuck around long enough to graduate. So we're thinking here like Johnny Dawkins, Christian Laettner, Grant Hill, Bobby Hurley, Shane Battier, Jay Williams. Maybe you include guys like Kyrie Irving and Elton Brand in here too. JJ Redick is on this short list. So this is my kind of core that I'm working with. Then I did actually want to think about a little bit about the NBA and how that talent manifested once they got to the league. And being successful at Duke, you know, going far in the tournament, winning championships, that kind of thing. And then finally, just all around, like, you know, how well loved are they? Taking all of that into consideration, I'm going with Grant Hill. He's got the 2 national championships that he won his freshman and sophomore years. He brought the team. He was the leader of the team that made it all the way again to the national championship game in 1994. He was an all-star. He's a Hall of Famer. He's everything for Duke. So I am taking Grant Hill as my best Duke player of all time.
I like that pick. That's a good pick. Jason, do you have Grant Hill or do you have someone else?
So I went through a very similar process to what Sam did, but I made it easy on myself. And I said, okay, you cannot be the greatest player at Duke of all time without being National Player of the Year. So the first thing I did was I looked at our National Player of the Years. And these guys are Dick Groat, Art Heyman, who I will immediately say, I just don't have enough knowledge of their game to really to judge them against these other guys. So even though they are contenders, so to speak, I kind of lop them off. And that's my own failing as someone who is not old enough to have known their games that well.
Jason, this means that we're going to get an email from DBR user Sage Grouse and Jim Sumner. They're probably going to just argue with us about those guys being better than all of these other players, and you youngins don't understand.
And it's absolutely possible, and it's our own failing. And the failing of video technology from that era that we don't know more about these guys' games. I mean, I know what they did. I know what they were capable of, but I don't feel like I can measure them up against the guys that I actually watched. So that leads me to the next tranche of players. These are all players. Every single one of these players I have seen play live and in person. And the other National Players of the Year are Johnny Dawkins, Danny Ferry, Christian Laettner, Grant Hill, Elton Brand, Shane Battier, Jay Will, JJ, Marvin Bagley, and Zion Williamson. So I looked at that group, and the guy I ended up picking was Christian Laettner. You know, maybe it's a function of my era because I was in school with Christian. 2 national titles obviously carries a tremendous amount of weight. The fact that he hit the huge clutch shots carries a tremendous amount of weight. But my goodness, I mean, if you look at his senior year, the dude hit 55% of his 3-pointers. I mean, that's just a crazy number for a big man, for a center. This was back in an era when you were playing against, I mean, men at the center position. Christian Laettner had to play against Shaquille O'Neal as a center. And Christian still averaged 21.5 points per game. He was the player of the year in 91, 92. I couldn't come up with anyone whose career at Duke, we're talking the best Duke player of all time, I couldn't come up with anyone whose career was better. I will say very quickly, If Duke had won it all in 2019, I might have been on the Zion Williamson train. I mean, if you look at Zion's stats, if you look at what Zion did during 2019, it was truly absurd to do that as a freshman. And then the other two guys who I really considered were Grant Hill and Shane Battier. I'll let Donald talk a little bit more about that, because I strongly suspect that none of us are going to have the same guy, and I bet Donald picks Shane. Am I right, Donald?
Okay, both of you had fine choices, and there's a couple of things that I think you guys kind of leaned in on, or at least used as part of your consideration, that I didn't. The first thing is I only considered the Duke career. I did not consider the NBA at all.
I did not. Obviously, I didn't either. Christian Laettner had a nice NBA career, but clearly not the best NBA career.
Right. So I just considered Duke stats. And I'm not a guy that believes that the more rings you have means that you are the better player. Okay. Robert Horry has 7 rings and no one thinks he's better than Michael Jordan or LeBron James or Kobe Bryant. But I think wins help us dictate how a player made himself an integral part of the team and would help that team be better than their opponent on any given night. And no one in Duke history won more than Shane Battier. He only missed 2 games in college. Duke went 131-15 in his time in Durham with him on the court. The most wins in college basketball history when he graduated. He held that record for 16 years. 4 ACC regular season championships, 4 ACC tournament championships, 4 Sweet 16s, 3 Elite Eights, 2 national title games, and 1 national championship. Final 4 most outstanding player, consensus national player of the year, consensus All-American. The list goes on. School record for charges, a record that will never be broken. A school record for charges. He also had the school record for most threes in a game until I believe J.J. Redick broke that in 2006. And number 31 will not be worn by another player in Duke history. Is busy hanging in the rafters. So I could say everything about Shane Battier, but the fact that he literally helped his team in every single way of the game, on offense and on defense, to victory more than any other player in college basketball history, a record that stood for 16 years. I think that combined with everything else is what separates him from the pack to me. And I think the good thing is I think we have some controversy because we all pick 3 guys that easily, at any other school, you'd be like, yep, that's it. That's the guy. We have guys to choose from. And there's, as both of you mentioned, a lot of guys that were left on the editing room floor that we kind of cut out of this because, we can only pick one and we have so many to choose from. So I think we're very fortunate in that regard.
Toward that end, Donald, there are 2 guys that we haven't really mentioned who I think injuries have shaped things in a way that really might have changed our mind about these 2 guys. The first one is Jay Will, who also has a ring alongside Shane Battier. If Jay Will's pro career is what I think it probably would have been had he not gotten hurt, then I think our perception of him might be very, very different. I'm not alone in the belief that Jay Will might have gone on to have one of the greatest Duke pro careers of all time, given his style of play and given his performance in college. And we were robbed of that. And I think that robs some of the luster of his performance in college. And then the other guy is Kyrie Irving, who we never got to see what that year would have been like. I think based on what Kyrie has done as a pro, there's a really good argument that Kyrie Irving would have been one of those National Player of the Years. And that Duke team certainly feels like that Duke team would have had a really good shot to win a ring. And Kyrie could have been very much in this conversation. I think he might have had one of the great freshman seasons of all time. And he might be in this conversation if it were not for the injury that robbed him of most of his freshman year.
I'll say it again. Behind me stands posters from those 2 teams that you just mentioned, the 2001-2002 team, the 2010-2011 team. I don't have one of 2018-2019, but I think those are the 3 teams since I've started going to Duke that I had the best chance, the best teams I thought that did not win a national championship since I started at Duke, which was in 2000. So I think those, if those teams have national championships, you see a lot more guys on that list. You see Carlos, or at least up for consideration. You see a Carlos Boozer or Mike Dunleavy, Jay Will. You see, Nolan Smith or Kyle Singler up there, or Kyrie Irving, as some of these guys that you could easily consider. And I think there's even, before that time, you have so many guys that did not win a National Player of the Year, did not go all ACC, but were so integral to the success of Duke that you have to consider them at least as some of the best players of all time that played in the Duke uniform. So it's a really, really good debate to have. I'm glad that we picked those 3 because I think those three were ones that we all kind of considered more than the others. And I think deep down, we all knew we would pick all of them. So, Sam, do you have anything to add before we wrap it up?
I just wanted to come back to Donald's pick of Shane Battier. I recently, sometime in the last couple of days, listened to JJ Redick's interview of author Michael Lewis on JJ's podcast. And of course, they talked about Shane Battier and Lewis's famous No Stats All-Star article that he wrote about Shane Battier that is now about 10 years old. So as I was listening to it, of course, I pulled up the article and read it again. I probably read it 3 or 4 times. And I encourage Duke fans, whether you've read it or not, to just go back and give it another read, because it is so fun to read about Shane Battier and the effect and the impact that he had on not just his team in the NBA, but across the entire NBA and entirely behind the scenes. We know that Shane was not the flashiest player, but the way that he approached, thinking about usage and thinking about the areas on the court and all that kind of stuff, and the way that the Rockets fed him data and he adjusted his game around it is just such a cool story and so telling of where the NBA has now gotten to today.
Players who have won a national championship, an NBA title, and a high school state championship, you think there would be a lot of those guys? It's very few. And Shane is one of those guys who have literally won a championship on every single level of basketball. It's something to be said about that. I know I didn't consider high school or the NBA in what I was saying, but the fact that, you have a guy who won wherever he went and made a team better wherever he went, even if it wasn't, again, in the stat sheet, it is something to be marveled. And I think you could say that about a lot of guys who played in the Duke uniform. Again, I want to thank Storm Runner 107 for that review and for that great question. And now, for all of you out there, we want to hear from you. So chime in on the forums for the post for this episode, or if you want to communicate your thoughts directly to us and let us all know that I was correct, send an email to dbrpodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget to rate and review our show whenever you get your podcasts. And again, we will read some of the best ones we see, even if they come with nice questions like Storm Runner provided for us.
Donald, I do need to question user Stormrunner, and if his or her username is a reference to the roller coaster at Hershey Park, why this person thinks that Stormrunner is the best roller coaster at Hershey Park, because it clearly is not. That was a niche shout out for all you Central Pennsylvanians who
Look, I have been to Hershey Park, so I know exactly what you're talking about. I've actually been on that ride.
The Stormrunner, it's not great. I think they hyped it up a lot, and I'm more of a Great Bear guy myself. Yeah,
Dooney Park is kind of my jam, but nothing beats Cedar Point for me. It's Cedar Point.
He should write to us at dbrpodcast@gmail.com and let us know how he came up with that name.
Exactly.
He could just be a big, he could just be a big Twister fan. So
yeah, possibly. Very possible.
There's a lot of places this could have come from.
Yeah, absolutely. But we will leave it there, and we will bring episode 241 of the DBR podcast to a close. Again, thank you to Stormrunner 107 for your question. Thank you, all of you, for listening in once again. And for my pal Sam and Jason, I am Donald, and it is now time for the Duke Band to take us home.